It's a real honor to be in this position at UT. My grandfather taught here for 35 years. It was his entire career, and always loved being on campus and love the energy of all of the amazing student entrepreneurs we have here on campus. And we actually have one tonight. John Arrow, the chairman and co-founder of Mutual Mobile, one of Austin's bright stars with over 300 people now and lots of clients all over our great nation. And John actually got his start here while he was a student. It's something that I encourage students all the time. You have nothing to lose here. Josh Baer talked about that as well when I interviewed him last month, that in this environment you have nothing to lose. And maybe we should just start there. Why did you start a business while you were in school? Was it in your freshman year?
It was, and first of all, it's a great honor to be here. Mutual Mobile has just a huge debt to the University of Texas. We started here. Our co-founders met each other here. A lot of the employees that we've hired over the years have come right out of McCombs and computer science and other programs at the University of Texas. And likewise, Brett, we owe a huge debt to you, because a lot of our employees have come from Bazaar Voice and really learned to cut their teeth there. And so it's just amazing how one great thing can lead to another. And that's exactly what happened. My co-founders and myself had been running different businesses all throughout college. We met each other freshman year because we were involved in the University of Texas Flying Club. We all had that interest in aviation, and just through serendipity, we had that interest in business. And it turned out that those work really well together, and that was really the catalyst of how that team formed.
And so, what do you guys do when you hooked up? Did you all have an interest in mobile, or did you start somewhere else?
It was. If you think back, really, mobile became a hot topic in 2007 after Steve Jobs first talked about the iPhone. I think what was interesting is a lot of people saw that first presentation and realized this is going to be an interesting gadget. It's certainly going to be novel and salient. What was special about when I saw it and my co-founder saw it is we had a slightly nuanced reaction. And that reaction was, this is not just going to be a really cool piece of technology. This is going to change the way the world fundamentally works. Healthcare, financial services, education are all going to have to be redone. And we saw new mobile, as something that was a paradigm as significant as the desktop computer or the internet.
But you guys didn't start out that grand. You started out with a fun app.
That's correct, and in many ways the story starts much earlier with all of us.
Right.
I'll tell my side of it. For as long as I can remember, I had this interest in business and the fact that you could sell something for money. I was that kid out on the street corner in the hot Austin summers selling lemonade, and in the winters I'd go out and try to sell some hot chocolate. And I must have annoyed just the heck out of our neighbors. Everything that I came up with, I'd go ring their doorbell and try to sell it to them, whether it was gift wrapped or whatever. I have this really embarrassing story about this one time where my best friend and I, at the time, we were probably 7 or 8 years old. We saw these really interesting plants near our house. We lived on a green belt growing up. And so we dug up these plants and we rang the doorbell of our elderly neighbors who would buy everything. No explanation. We ring the doorbell, they open up, and would you like to buy these plants? And they give us this very stern look and say no, and close the door on our face. And that was odd. We went back to playing, totally forgot about selling anything, started doing what normal 7-year-olds do. And then I get a call later that afternoon from my mom, who's very upset with me, because apparently she got a call from our neighbors that we had dug up their newly planted flowers and tried to sell their flowers back to them. And so that was really an interesting lesson there. But fortunately, that didn't deter my interest in business. And when I started using a computer, it kind of strengthened it, because I don't know who grew up here in Austin. Do we have any Austinites that are from here? Okay, just a handful.
And yeah,
you are too,
me
Brett.
as well, absolutely. Very proud Austinite.
Yeah, and you were here during the dot-com boom and bust. You were in San Francisco too, right?
Actually, I was in San Francisco starting in 2000 to 2003, which
Okay.
I credit as one of the most important educational experiences because it's height of the boom and depths of despair. And I know Austin felt that as well.
That must have been fascinating. I remember observing this as an 11 or 12-year-old and just trying to make sense of how one day everything had a dot-com at the end of it, and how everybody had a Porsche Carrera or 911 driving down the road, and thinking, what was this all about? And I understood it involved the internet, but I didn't really make sense of it.
Well, they were getting those as signing bonuses.
That's right. Now it makes more sense looking back,
Right.
and just these elaborate parties and all this fundraising, and then as soon as it came, it was gone. It just all evaporated.
Right.
And the way that I eventually came to terms with it wasn't the internet so much as it was this loss of perception in what really mattered, kind of this error in causality. I've talked about cargo cults, if any of you have seen me speak before, and that just left such a huge impact on me that I wanted to figure out how could you create a business that isn't just all hype? How could you create something that effectively makes money from day one, and you don't need anybody else's permission? And so that was an idea I got incredibly excited about, and then started taking steps as a 12-year-old to start my first business.
So if we start there, take me through, age 12.
Right. What's
the snapshot through UT
Sure.
to start Mutual Mobile, and what was the first thing you did at Mutual Mobile?
Great. I'll try to give the compressed version, and feel free to if you want me to elaborate on any part. Essentially, I just became so fascinated with computers, and not just computers, but AOL Instant Messenger when that first came out. I was just enamored that you could be at home and talk with your friends at school, and just learned everything that I could about this. And just by sheer coincidence, one night at the dinner table, my mom, who's a psychotherapist, was talking about how one of her clients was a victim of basically an online predator. And that was such a new concept that no one had really experienced that. And we certainly had that discussion about the dangers and everything, and became really aware of it. And sure enough, this wasn't an isolated thing. If you went on to online message boards, you'd see that there were lots of parents who were trying to better understand what AOL Instant Messenger was all about and the dangers. And the fact of the matter was there wasn't great information. And so I had the idea of creating a little ebook to describe it, setting up a PayPal account where you could basically buy this for $5. And went back to that message board, posted the link. It was a GeoCities site, if you remember GeoCities.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people don't remember GeoCities, but it was way before Facebook, way before Friendster, and yes.
This WYSIWYG web editor that lets you make a website for free and post those links in the message boards, and didn't know what was going to happen, but sure enough, within no more than a couple hours, I had my first 3 orders. Wow, this is great, I just made $15. And it didn't occur.
And you didn't get in trouble for digging up anybody's flower bed.
Yeah, even better. No one yelling at me this time. And so at that point, I didn't realize that there was going to be more to this. But I was fascinated by completing that cycle, and so I kind of doubled down on that, found more message boards, and started raising the price to the point where I was doing several $100s a day through my PayPal account. This is great. The one complaint that I started getting from customers was that the product didn't go far enough. There was still this huge information disparity when it came to what was this brave new online world. Mm-hmm. And some parents just did not have the technological IQ to address that themselves. And so I realized that there would be room for a monitoring program, a surveillance program that you could put on your son or daughter's computer and basically track what they're doing. And so I took all of the profits from that one business, and I went to one of the outsourced websites. I think it was scriptlance.com or one of them, and found this amazing engineer in Russia, and told him my idea, and spec'd it out with him, and we were able to create this product and launch it. And as soon as we put it out there, it didn't sell. It's like, great, I just spent all of this money that I created. The links and the message boards didn't seem like there was really a market for it. And then I thought, well, I'll just try and experiment and buy some Google ads. Or maybe it was Overture at the time, I don't even remember. And put the ads out there, and within 12 hours I had half a dozen sales of this. And started to realize that was the market, people who were actively looking for this type of product. And this time I was halfway through high school, and I just got so excited about that. I decided, well, I'm gonna drop out once I hit $1,000 a day, because I want to just focus on this full time. And I told my parents, they're like, no, you're not. And sure enough, hit that milestone and stayed in school, and this kind of let me look at a lot of other ancillary businesses, and ran this through some of college. But right around the Steve Jobs talk is when I got really fascinated with mobile, and I
right around the unveiling.
Of the iPhone, and leading up to that period, I had a lot of extreme difficulties with running a business. I was under 18, and so when PayPal found out about that, I wasn't able to send in my driver's license. They closed my account down, and so I had spending all this money on advertising, and the business was essentially closed. And it was this really scary moment. So I had to hustle, and I was able to create a corporation, and then I found a bank that was willing to basically let the corporation enter into the contract, and then I was taking credit cards again, so I learned all about that. And I was so miffed by the PayPal experience, so I thought, well, maybe I'll try creating my own payment system. I think I can do it better. This was one of my great first failures, because put the website up, start advertising it with Google AdWords. Before I know it, people are using the system. I spent a ton of money getting it set up, and I'm getting all these checks in. The idea was you would use your bank account to fund it rather than credit cards or the other funding methods within PayPal. It's like, wow, everybody's using this. And then sure enough, the fraud starts to hit. And then I realized why PayPal is so difficult to work with and had such thin margins. But it was a great learning experience. And if we flash forward to...
now it would have been Bitcoin.
Probably would have been Bitcoin, yeah. Any Bitcoin investors in here? Speculators, I should say? Good.
I don't want to touch it personally, but
yeah,
that may be a mistake. I can live with that mistake.
It's hard. It's really hard to say. Yeah, it certainly feels like a tulip bubble, though, or tulip bulb.
Yeah,
So.
well, yeah. There's a lot of problems with it, but
A lot of issues.
I won't digress.
Right. And so college was a great experience, because once I was in this UT environment, I started meeting like-minded individuals, and that was basically a catalyst for my entrepreneurial activity. Every time I'd have an idea, I'd be able to talk about it with somebody who also shared that enthusiasm, and it led to some interesting results. One of my kind of most controversial ventures was this thing called unfaced.com, where you could basically see who was looking at your Facebook profile and how often. It essentially exploded overnight, and before I knew it, I had tens of thousands of users. Facebook comes in and shuts down my account over it. And I decided, well, I'll just use an alias on Facebook. So I wasn't going to take it down just to get my account back. But it was a really interesting experience, because I got a lot of users but wasn't able to successfully figure out how to monetize it. And so it made me have a renewed interest back in the type of business that I knew was successful, which was kind of figuring out how to make that first dollar in revenue and then optimize it and continue scaling it. And so when we saw the iPhone announced by Steve Jobs, I realized this is going to be one of those rare moments in time that first mover advantage is incredibly important. And so referencing the app that you talked about, growing up in Austin, I didn't want to create a .com bubble company. I was very cognizant that whenever you have a paradigm like that, it could be pretty easy to do that. In the .com boom, everybody took brick and mortar and converted it over to web. Well, now everybody was going to be taking web and converting it over to mobile. I didn't want to be a part of that. And so very quickly decided, you know what, let's not focus on creating our own applications, but figure out how we can empower businesses who are already successful to derive more value on mobile. And so we did one application just to get it out of our system called Hang Time, and that was has anyone heard of Hang Time? A few people? Okay. And just for those of you who don't know, Hang Time was released when there were about 100 apps in the store. And just by the sheer nature of there not being a lot of apps, it was successful.
What year was that, by the way?
This was early 2009. So
really, in 2009, there were only 100 apps.
Something like that. Because the iPhone was announced in 2007, went live in 2008, and then we didn't get the App Store until early 2009, I believe, to check those dates. But it just was instantly downloaded by everybody. Right. And the whole premise was using the accelerometer in your phone. You basically could take your phone, you could toss it up in the air, and it would record how long your phone was aloft. That was like a 0.8-second throw. And you could compete with people around the world to see who could throw their iPhone the highest. And so I know, Brett, you've heard this story. But
Apple loved this, by the way,
Apple
'cause
loved this.
lots of replacement phones.
Oh yeah. It was funny because it seemed to do better when there were new versions of the iPhone coming out, and I think they wanted people to figure out how to break their old version. And we kind of forgot about it for a while. I mean, after the scores hit 3 seconds, it was like, okay, let's move on, do something more meaningful. And then one day we see that score for, I think it was 22 seconds, and figure out somebody, doing the math in your head, 9.8 meters per second squared. There's no way that'd be thousands of feet. Get in touch with the guy, and he took it skydiving, it turns out, and the name of the game became who can wait the longest to open a parachute. And so right about that time, Apple said this is not good, and rightfully yanked it from the store.
Really?
But
I didn't know about the yanking.
They yanked it from the store, yeah, which probably was better than somebody slamming into the ground. But it was named the second dumbest iPhone app of all time by Gizmodo, which we're really proud of. And so the interesting part of that, though, was it was very thrilling for us to create something that was used by tens of thousands of people and really quickly. But it didn't have any type of positive impact on the world. At least, maybe it was a few moments of enjoyment, but it didn't have the lasting type of value that we knew that this technology was capable of. So the decision, what to do next was turned on its head, and we said, how could we have the most effect in the world? How could we positively use this technology to change people's lives? And the first area that really called to us was healthcare. Anybody who's had a family in the hospital knows that medical errors are still a very, very serious thing. They kill, I think it's 8 times more people every year than car accidents in some form, which is just astounding to think about. And so we had the idea, well, how could we leverage mobile to reduce paper and pen workflows? And that was kind of really the first big idea. And so we started contacting different healthcare companies, found a great company out of Atlanta called Greenway Medical, and they were really our first client that proved what mobile was capable of. And not only did it save hospitals money, not only did it provide a better experience for the physicians, it actually caused medical errors to go down, and that was something that was really powerful. And we realized, well, we could assemble a team, create a mission around that pursuit, having that type of real change in the world. And so education was what we looked at next.
And that was, you were still in school?
Still in school at this point, yeah.
And so how were you managing that with courses, and how were your co-founders managing that with also needing to go to school?
Well, school definitely was put on the back burner. I think my grades and Mutual Mobile's head count were probably inversely proportional.
All right.
Now that I think about it.
But that also means with revenues.
With revenue too, exactly. And so it got to the point, we were just talking about this, but decisions started getting made. Well, should I skip a meeting or go to class? And at this time, end of 2009, we had about 30 people, and it just got to the point where had to fully commit in. We didn't make that decision from day one, but myself and Jason Story, another co-founder, we decided, well, we have to drop out and focus on this full time.
But you had one credit left.
I have one Espanol class left, I believe. Yeah.
So I don't have the power to bestow an
that's why I thought this was a surprise party to give me a degree tonight.
Bob may have that power. I don't have that power, but all right, good. I saw him take a note. So walk me through, now you're out of school, and the company's 30 people, and the company today is 300 folks. And kind of walk me through the progression of the different scaling challenges and opportunities.
Right, and it's an interesting set of scaling challenges. So my background was in product-based businesses. Several of our co-founders also had that experience. And so it was really interesting to see a services company up close and personal. The mantra that we heard from everyone we talked to at that time is you can't scale services. It's just not possible to do. And so that kind of provided this additional motivation. Well, we want to try to figure out how to do it. And the thing that we recognized is critical to our success is that mobile was this paradigm that required equal parts engineering and equal parts design. And we realized when you bring those two elements together, that's when you have the type of scenarios where you can reduce medical errors or improve literacy in schools. And so we focused very, very hard on assembling that team, more than even client acquisition. We wanted the best minds in mobile, and that meant that we had to sell that vision. And unfortunately, there weren't a lot of people who were up to speed on this technology. Objective-C was a very rare language, and so it meant that we had to do a lot of the training. And one of the things that we did while we were at the university was we created a student organization called the University of Texas Smartphone Entrepreneurs. And so the whole goal was to basically unite people who shared that passion for what mobile could do, regardless of where they were at, regardless of whether they were fluent in Objective-C. Let's bring those people together, the designers, the engineers, the business people. And it just so happened that a lot of our early employees came from that pool. And once we had that team, we really had the most scale out of any other mobile services company at the time. And that meant that a lot of times the go-to-market was as simple as saying we had the bandwidth to do it. And it meant that we could be really selective with the types of customers that we worked with. We stayed almost completely away from migration type opportunities where it was taking a web presence and moving to mobile, and instead focused on the types of initiatives that made more sense on mobility. And this allowed us to start working with larger and larger clients, almost like climbing up a mountain. Once we had proof points from a name that nobody had ever heard of, it became easier to work with more and more recognized names. And I think by the end of 2010, we had added Google and Audi and Cisco to our portfolio. And it kind of gave us this credibility that nobody at the time really had.
So today you did GIST EIR office hours, and now you have a much larger audience in this room, and of course it's being recorded. What would you like to tell students that are starting their businesses while they're here at school in terms of tips for them? I mean, one tip I just took away from that, which I think is brilliant, is you created a cross-school club that actually, as it turns out, became your initial team.
Right.
And that's I think that's brilliant, because one of the challenges I think at a university of this size is that people tend to operate in silos, the business school, the engineering school, as opposed to collaborating across. And I'm on a mission to change that to the greatest extent I can. I know that Bob's on that mission, and we're doing a lot of collaborating. But you did it as a student, so that's a great takeaway.
I was
What are some of the others?
I was so blown away by the office hours. To every student who came to me, I was, wow. I wish I was at UT again with you, because it was so invigorating to hear about the different businesses. And another thing that I wish is that
I sincerely feel that way too. Every time I do office hours, I love it.
Such a powerful thing. I want to do it again. I'd love to be invited back to doing that. It was incredible.
You got that deal.
And so the other takeaway that I have is that more now than ever before, there's a lot of resources. So Nick Spiller and UTLEA, and the fact that Bob's here, and that Brett, that you're here, and Josh, it just seems finally the university is really starting to take entrepreneurship seriously. And I would encourage any entrepreneur or aspiring entrepreneur to leverage that to the full extent, because that's something that not a lot of universities have, and it's very great to see that University of Texas has it. Now, I think there is also some room for improvement at the university. Is it Frank that I met with? Well, we were talking today, and you had one interesting critique that you observed. Do you want to remind me what it is? I'll repeat it since I'm wearing the mic.
Because they want to be successful with no real idea of what success is. And I think so many people get so caught up in, I want to do this so I can be successful, that they forget what they actually want to do. They don't actually think, do I actually want to be an investment banker? I don't even know what this job is. And they forget how to dream.
Right. That's a great point. So Frank's saying which is such a high density of really intelligent individuals here at McCombs and in University of Texas Comp Sci, yet a lot of them, their aspiration is more towards working at Google or Facebook or Apple, right? And it's something that
Or
I've
being an investment banker.
or being an investment banker, right? And it's a great career if that's your passion. But that same skill set a lot of times could apply to being an entrepreneur. And I know that the time I've spent recruiting up on the West Coast or the East Coast, you ask those same students at Harvard or Stanford what they want to do, and they say, I want to go start a company. And so the dichotomy between that is very interesting. I'm not sure exactly why it is. Curious afterwards if anybody has some ideas. One thing that I've noticed just from the time that I've spent at University of Texas is that a lot of the students here are highly, highly ambitious, but they're not necessarily entrepreneurs. And I have this concern that right now the admission process doesn't necessarily allow those types of entrepreneurs into the University of Texas. I know several students that were running great companies in high school, one of which was approaching $1 million of revenue in a year here in Austin. And he couldn't get into the University of Texas because he wasn't top 10%, so he had to move out to the West Coast. And it's a shame that we lose that group of entrepreneurs. And if you really think about it, there's going to be two age groups of entrepreneurs. Generally, you have the ones that are 18, 19, 20 years old, coming right out of high school into college, and then you have the ones that are in their mid-50s, right, once they have some capital built up and the kids are off at college. And it's a shame if we have those entrepreneurs right here in Central Texas, North Texas, South Texas, wherever, that we're not providing some way to evaluate them in some admission track into UT.
Well, one thing that's tough is I think business success while you're a student is probably inversely correlated with your grades.
I think so.
Certainly, Michael Dell tells that story all the time, and you got started so early. Where some people only get started while they're here at the university. I only got started when I was getting my MBA, so I was a late bloomer compared to you. And then we had Cotter Cunningham here. I interviewed him, and he got started when he was 46 years old.
Oh, wow.
Now he's CEO of a company that's worth over $1.7 billion on the stock market. Retail me not. So it was a really fascinating discussion because he had great operational experience that we lacked in starting out, because you only get that through experience.
You really do. You're right.
So I think it's a challenge for any university, frankly, because grades are a component.
I think so, and it's a good thing too, because I can say that sitting in class and hearing these concepts of finance and accounting for the first time were quite useful. And so the other tip that I'll leave you with is starting now is always the best policy. I don't think you have to wait till you finish college. It can be tempting to want to get that degree, finish that class, but there's really no reason why you can't start now and experiment, test out an idea. Because most ideas you can test in a matter of hours. You don't need to go out and start fundraising to figure out if there's some kind of glimmer of opportunity that you should look at more seriously. So yeah.
Well, and that's a fairly new trend in the world. I mean, if you look at the past decade, there have been more businesses get to $1 billion in revenue in a super, super fast period. I mean, I think it took Groupon something like two years, and it took Priceline something like 3 years. I may have those wrong, but it's roughly in that kind of order of magnitude. And a huge part of that is because of the internet and because of mobile.
Absolutely.
Because of our global connectivity. And one of the debates I was having with some friends recently is about Snapchat, which is entirely mobile.
Yeah.
What do you think about something like that? A company that's 2 years old, has no revenue, has 30 employees, and is worth $3 billion.
Well, it's funny. I guess what something's worth is what somebody's willing to pay for it.
That is very true.
And Snapchat.
And that can change.
It can change at any moment.
Right.
I think Snapchat's an outlier, and you can't really build a financial model that justifies that $3 billion price. But if you look at the situation holistically, my 2 cents on the whole Snapchat $3 billion valuation is that it's a defensive move for Facebook. It's pretty inexpensive insurance, right? We all have insurance on our car or our house, or at least most of us do. Why not spend $3 billion, less than 3% of the company's net worth, just to ward off a potential threat if Snapchat could start taking our
And they did that with Instagram.
They did that with Instagram.
For 1%
right,
of
and
their company.
so yeah, and so
I do think at that scale you only think in terms of percents. I don't think you think in terms of billions.
I do, yeah. That may be some moral hazard there in that respect.
Right.
The other interesting thing is, I think the founders of Snapchat have been incentivized in an interesting way, where they've essentially taken enough money off the table that they have the fortitude to stay into their company and turn down $3 billion. And so taking that off the table gives them the confidence. That being said, if I was them, I would have taken the $3 billion.
Yeah, just for the record.
Just for the record. Well, more than anything else, I would be afraid that if I turned that down and then the value collapsed, it would be people would start using Snapchat as when you made a bad mistake and you should have taken something.
It would become a verb.
Yeah, it would become a verb.
You got Snapchatted. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of utility in $3 billion.
Yeah.
You could use $3 billion to start quite a few companies, for
could.
example, as well as maybe solve one of the world's biggest problems.
Right. Well, I'm glad they didn't, though, because it'll be more interesting to watch. So.
Yeah, that's true. What do you think about, just since you're kind of a mobile guru now, what do you think about this war between Android and Apple? The latest, or iOS, the latest stats I've read are Android now has 32% global market share, and iOS has 12%. In the U.S., of course, iOS is very dominant. But even developer revenue now, it looks like Android is kind of almost neck and neck with how much money developers can make if they start out on Android versus iOS. Those are the latest things I know.
Yep. I think that's a great example of when percentages can be misleading.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the demographics, you look at the types of users, they're night and day, and they're not indicative of the revenue generating potential. They're not indicative of the types of use cases for these technologies. And so we have to dive deeper and uncover who are the people behind those percentages. It's a fun debate because it's an easy soundbite for the press to cover, just like the HTML5 and native arguments of yesterday were. But in reality, mobile is going to rise. I think we're going to continue to see massive penetration on iOS and Android for the foreseeable future. I don't think there's going to be one eclipsing the other anytime soon, at least in utility and the amount of time spent engaged on the platforms.
Well, and one stat too, yesterday was Cyber Monday, so obviously this is the height of the shopping season. And I'm pretty sure iOS here in the US was responsible for about 70% of the online mobile sales for Cyber Monday. So that gets to your point about what people are actually doing with the device and what the demographics are. And
which is incredibly fascinating. I heard that 70% statistics, what I heard as well, and if you dive a layer deeper, you'll figure out well over 2/3 of that was on iPad.
Yeah, that's
I believe
true.
represented.
Yeah, that's
so
right. Was on tablet.
It's fascinating to think about how quickly iPads, not just tablets, but specifically iPads, have become the way that retailers sell their brands. I mean, it's got to be historic how quick that adoption has been. And it really makes sense because you have all of a sudden this use case where people are actively engaged in a buying mode. You may go to your computer to browse, but you pick up your iPad when you have intent to buy. And so over the next several years, I anticipate we're going to see way more companies focused on commerce, specifically relating to the iPad and the tablet. We're working on a few initiatives now, but it's incredibly exciting to see those adoption numbers.
Going back to your roots for a moment, were your parents entrepreneurs, or did they kind of look at you strange when you were starting your first companies, or did they really encourage you?
I've had incredibly supportive parents. One of my very first ventures, which I guess we didn't talk about, was in 5th grade. There was a school newspaper, it's an official school newspaper, and I decided to create my own version of the newspaper. And the main editorial content in the paper was who liked who. I didn't know about journalistic integrity and source attribution at this day and age, so I just kind of took a guess, and I think I was fairly accurate. So the next day at school, we had this old, or I guess it was very modern and new at the time, laser printer, but it took about 5 minutes to print each page, and I stayed up and printed off 20 copies of it in black and white, and brought it into school and sold it for either $1 or 5 respect coupons, and sold out at recess within 15 minutes. So everybody took these and got really mad about it. And
I was going to say either you're the most popular or the most hated.
I think it was more towards the most hated. And sure enough, before the end of the day, I get called into the principal's office, and I had some friends that I was able to convince to help in selling the paper with me, and so they didn't, they were willing to come in, but they didn't know that they would get in trouble over it. And what was funny is I brought in 3 friends, and the principal sat us down and said, well, I'm going to call your parents right now. And so one by one, he calls our parents at work, and I can kind of see through the window that there's this argument that's happening. And I learned later that all 3 of my friends were grounded for, I think, several weeks. And when my parents found out about it, it was, oh, that's a great idea.
That's awesome.
Uh-huh.
And so all throughout they
were incredibly
cheering you
supportive.
on.
I mean, my mom would like, Dr. Metcalf, my mom would like for me to have a degree, so if you're penning that in right now. That was probably the only sticking point. I think she's come to terms with it for a while. One of our co-founders, Jason Story, his mom believes he has a degree, but he doesn't. So
She knows now. This is
well,
on
I
video.
think that's right. Oh, we're on the record here. We'll have to
Right,
edit. We'll have to
exactly.
edit that out.
This will be one of those awkward YouTube moments.
Yes, that'll be a good one.
we
We'll
just
film
have.
her reaction when she finds out about it.
So bouncing back to
Yeah.
just kind of where Mutual Mobile's at now,
Mm-hmm.
WPP invested, and at that point, you and they made the decision for you to become the chairman and to promote 2 of your executives to be co-CEOs.
That's right.
Kind of walk me through that, and there's a very famous company in town, Whole Foods, which has co-CEOs.
Yep.
Works incredibly well. But just kind of walk me through that whole dynamic. And
Sure. So if we take a step back, 2 of my co-founders, Mickey and Tarun, knew these guys from pretty much day one at college, and they were types of people where I knew I wanted to do a business someday with them. Best friends in the world, would trust either of them with my life, and I very much have through various adventures. And so we knew that there was something very powerful about this dynamic between the 3 of us. And going into Mutual Mobile, we had a lot of success really, really quickly. So much so that by the end of 2011, early 2012, we started getting these non-solicited offers to buy the company. Some were from our customers, some were from competing firms like Accenture, and none of us wanted to sell the company. We realized we have the potential to create something so large. At the same token, we would like the ability to take some money off the table, which if you're thinking about creating a business, that should certainly go into your calculus. Well, when are you going to reach that liquidity point? And we decided we didn't want to sell the company, but we wanted to look at other mechanisms for doing that. And
Sure.
Talked with a lot of people in the venture capital and the private equity world, and realized they didn't have the right fit for what we were trying to do. We were very capital efficient, bootstrap company. We didn't need additional capital to grow faster. Really, we were looking just for a way to de-risk and take some money off the table. At the same time, none of the financial partners really offered anything other than the money. And so we started thinking about who could be the number one partner for us. And if you think about Mutual Mobile's business, about a half of what we do enters on the marketing side, where either the CMO or the VP of sales is trying to figure out how to use mobile to generate more revenue. And it just so happens that WPP is very closely aligned with the customers that we dream about doing business with. And so we started talking to them for about a year and realized this is a partner that we want to bring in to the company. And it was such a great fit. It seemed to kind of happen like magic, and they've been a great partner over the last 4 months. Mickey and Tarun have such an intimate understanding of the business, and they're the people that I think should be at the helm to get us to basically our $100 million in revenue. Mm-hmm. So we're still a year and a half out from reaching that goal, but my job now is really to be service to the co-CEOs. Mm-hmm. Our business is so partner-centric now that I think if we could find the right people, we might have five co-CEOs. But right now we have 2.
Don't do what REM did. They did something like that, I think.
I think that can be a move out of desperation. A lot of times when you see those rapid succession of leadership changes,
I think they had 3 co-CEOs. And
that was a little bit weird. Yeah, that's a little bit weird.
So how did they divide their time,
Sure.
in terms of being co-CEOs?
So one of the interesting things about Mutual Mobile and just the not just the founding team, but the early management team is we all have very complementary skill sets. We recognized as 5 college students that there's a lot of gaps, a lot of weaknesses that we had. None of us had worked for a Fortune 1000 company, which was going to be our main customer set. So we spent a ton of our effort, and still do today, in finding people who have those strengths where we have lapses. And so if we've done anything amazing, it's convincing those types of people to be part of Mutual Mobile. And if you think about kind of how our business is run, there's a huge delivery side of the business where it's about fulfilling our customers' desires and producing solutions that have business-changing impact. And there's also a sales component. So Tarun focuses predominantly on the delivery side. Mickey focuses a lot on the sales and business development side. Now there's lots of intersection there, but that's how it's loosely split today.
Right. Cool. So I want to make sure that I save enough time for questions. We have about 15 minutes left. And do you mind if we bring the mic to you? That way it'll just play out well on audio here. Thanks, Nick.
Okay, so 2 questions. First, you think you'll ever go back to finish up that Spanish class?
I want to learn Spanish. I love Spanish-speaking countries, so I have no doubt I will learn Spanish at some point. I'll say that.
All right. And I guess the second question is, I think you have a very interesting philosophy on, I guess, like starting a business. Because you talked about how you should find that like revenue-generating idea or product, and then from there grow it, which is a little bit different, I think, from some of the businesses that we see today. I mean, you look at Twitter, Snapchat. Twitter just had its IPO. We weren't really sure if it was going to go public because they weren't sure if they could monetize it. So I guess how do you balance that? Because I feel like a lot of the businesses today don't always start off with that monetizing idea in mind.
I think you hit on a very important issue. I mean, basically fundraising versus bootstrapping, and that can be quite polarizing. There's a lot of strong views either way. As it pertains to Mutual Mobile, a lot of our decision to bootstrap was circumstantial. If you think about when we started in the summer of 2008, the Dow had a 770-point decline, right? We had the whole credit default swap thing blow up and propelled our country into one of the worst financial disasters that we've ever been in. And credit markets were frozen, VCs stopped writing checks, and so there really wasn't any other option. If we had said we wanted to do a product business and we wanted to raise capital, that was not the time to do it. Now, it was the perfect time to bootstrap because things were a lot cheaper. Many people, unfortunately, had been laid off, but it meant that the job market in Austin meant that we could have our pick of the best people. It meant that there was lots of real estate that was available that could be leased for lower than normal. And so you have to basically leverage and go with your situation. I don't think there's a guiding north on whether you should start fundraising or start trying to bootstrap. Really, it's going to come down to proving out the idea first and then figuring out, well, what is the economic climate you're in, and choose the path of least resistance is what I'd recommend.
And I would take a slightly, I love that answer. I'll just take a slightly different angle, which is it's a heck of a lot easier to create a B2B company, which is all I've done, in my entrepreneurial career, than create a B2C company that turns out to be worth something like what Twitter's worth. I mean, if you can find a way to make everybody use your app like Snapchat, then the bet will be that somehow, some way, they're going to figure out monetization. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Twitter and Facebook have, and I think the reason that they're valued the way they are is because Google is now over $1,000 a share and is worth $100 billion more than Walmart, which is our Fortune 1. So I mean, if it wasn't for Google showing that that could be the path, I don't think those companies would have that kind of valuation. If you as a student can create an app that everybody uses, you're going to have something that's pretty damn valuable.
Yeah.
But it's really, really hard because everybody is trying to figure that out. And what you did and what I've done with Bizarre Voice and Core Metrics is a lot easier because you're selling to a defined set of people. You're not trying to create something that 1 billion people will hopefully use.
Yeah, great point. And many, Snapchat, certainly an outlier, right? So when you're thinking about starting your own business, at least your first one, I would focus on expected value, right? Rather than trying to create the next Snapchat. How can you create a company that could be doing several $1 million in revenue and that you have the option to sell in a few years? And so,
especially if you want to bootstrap.
Especially if you want to
B2B is a lot easier to bootstrap.
A lot easier to bootstrap, and it's a type of thing where if you don't raise money, you have the ability to sell fairly early on. If you do raise money, it means you're going to have really the requirement that you hit certain milestones before you're able to sell and personally benefit from the sale. So that's something else.
Well, that's not always true.
Right.
With Bizarre Voice, we sold some along the way.
Okay.
And that actually, I think, helped us create a bigger company. And the VCs actually understood that having some liquidity
it's helpful.
Would be helpful.
That's great.
And so that actually benefited the company a lot. And that's become a more normal play now for VCs because of the pressure of things like second market.
Right.
But certainly if you bootstrapped it, you own 100%, you have full control over that decision. Yes?
I was trying to look up the numbers. It looks like mobile video use is 50 to 60% of all data consumed over wireless. That's expected to be 80% by 2017. I was wondering if you can comment on how you see that shaping out, either from the content provider perspective or your own experience with Mutual Mobile.
So from my perspective, we've seen massive strain on infrastructure right now, where it used to be the device was the constraining factor. Now, in many cases, it is the infrastructure. And we're very fortunate living in Austin, Texas, that we're going to get Google Fiber. But it's unlikely that the rest of the country, the rest of the world is going to have that at any time soon. So it means much of the improvement is going to need to come in the form of software and better compression technologies. Otherwise, we're going to get to a point where video usage on phones is going to approach unusability. And if you ever spend any time in New York or San Francisco, you know how hard it is to use your cell phone there. And so I'm hoping that we're going to see major advances in software and compression technology that'll make that problem less so. Does that answer your question?
Hey, Bob, do you mind if I put you on the spot to get your take on that? Because I imagine that's something you study as well in terms of just, hey, can we bring the mic to you? Sorry. If you know Bob's background, you know he knows a thing or two.
So we have a 100 gigabit per second Ethernet is now running, and they're working on 400 gigabits, and right after that will be terabits. So I'm not sure there's going to be an infrastructure problem.
That's great.
And it isn't going to be just Google Fiber, because one of the beautiful things that just happened is Google Fiber was announced, and guess what? AT&T is now offering optical
I think
fiber.
that's an excellent point. Puts
So I
pressure
think
on
the
competition.
infrastructure is coming. The gigification of the internet is now in progress.
Right. Great. You can continue to use Netflix. Yes.
I'm curious about, you mentioned iOS, which uses Objective-C, Android, Java, everything that's happening on the web. What has been your experience on finding the technical talent? And what issues do you see on finding it here versus on recruiting from other parts of the world?
So several macro trends that we've observed is that the actual engineering behind Objective-C HTML5 has commoditized incredibly quickly. We all knew it was going to happen. I'd say it's largely already happened. It's happened faster than Java. Now, there's variability in terms of the skill sets, but I don't anticipate a shortage. At the higher end, at the upper end of that talent, there's always going to be a desire for that, and those are the types of people that we hire, and it means that most of the time we're recruiting from out of state to get people to come to Austin. But markets are incredibly efficient, and when there's demand, people start learning and get up to speed on those technologies.
Are you finding it a problem to recruit people here?
Not to Austin. That's one of the best benefits to starting a business here is that it's not a hard sell, right? High quality of life. You get to be around really smart people. If you come down and you work for a small startup and it doesn't work out, there's a couple other dozen that you can check out. So it's not a risky move to come to Austin, even if you have a family.
And just for the record, I didn't have a problem either recruiting people here. We moved probably 25% of our people that we were hiring a quarter from other places to Austin.
Hello. Okay. First off, thank you very much. I think hearing your story is extremely inspiring, and I learned a lot. But I guess my question deals with recently there have been a lot of studies predicting the rise of the global middle class and how in the next 10, 20, 30 years there's going to be an explosion of citizens in the middle class, especially in China and India. And my question is, I guess, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, how do you think this will affect how you do business and how entrepreneurship will be in the future when the middle class will explode and the subsequent number of people in the consumer market will also explode?
It's an incredibly exciting time, isn't it? It's riveting that you can have societies that really haven't undergone an industrial revolution, and now they have computers in their hands. I've spent a fair amount of time in India, and it just amazed me that even the most rural farmers all have smartphones now. And it's going to cause markets to flatten. It's going to cause the digital divide to come together a lot quicker. And so any companies that are ignoring more emerging markets right now, it's going to be a classic innovator's dilemma. They're going to miss out on those opportunities. And so commerce, as it is in most periods of time, is the factor that kind of causes the innovation. So micropayments specifically, a lot of the microfinance too, is now going to be a lot more possible. And so we're looking a lot, we do a lot within commerce. We work on Google Wallet and we do ISIS. And so kind of the natural expansion plans for both of those companies is places like China and India and Eastern Europe.
Yeah, sure. Nick, thanks.
Okay, so we've talked about starting new ventures, and that's really exciting and fun. But there's at what point do you start to think about the corporate law side of things? I work for a corporation that spends all of their time protecting their technology. Mm-hmm. And when you were young and when you were starting this up, what kind of entity did you form that, especially when you were in a partnership as opposed to just a single person corporation? And then how did you keep somebody from just running off with your idea?
Sure. So great question. It's something that if anything keeps me up at night today, it's kind of that some IP lawsuit or something where we ended up granting some type of protections or something. Fortunately, for most entrepreneurs who are starting out, I think attention is better spent on proving out the idea. If it's in an area where there might be some IP issues or it might be gray, wait until you get those first few cease and desist letters, and then go spend some time with counsel. I've just seen a lot of companies allocate more time and money than they should lawyering up early on rather than going out and executing and improving the idea. Now, after you have traction, then it becomes an issue of preservation, right? And then it's critical. I would say, though, you should be able to show some revenue, show some profitability if you don't have an angel before you invest heavily in kind of the entity side of things. And I know I'm somewhat of a contrarian in that respect. Mutual Mobile operated for a good 4 or 5 months before we were an S Corp or C Corp.
I mean, one thing I would just add to that is that I talk with a lot of entrepreneurs who are afraid because they don't have patents. And the reality is that it takes years for patents to issue. When you're starting out, if you have something that you think is going to be valuable, I think you should pursue a provisional or maybe even a patent. But the reality is that you won't have the money to defend it. You won't have the money to actually use it unless you build a real business. So it really doesn't matter. Like if you start a business with or without patents, all that matters is if the market's there and if you can execute and grab a portion of the market.
That's
Yeah, time to market. Yeah,
best defense, right? Is going to be building that successful
Yeah.
business.
A great book on this is The Art of the Start by Guy Kawasaki. And Bootstrapper's Bible by Seth Godin is also a fantastic book about just getting out there, proving it, and great things will happen along the way. But by the way, do you have any book recommendations you'd recommend for students here?
One of my, based on some of the startup ideas that I heard from you guys earlier today, I highly recommend Viral Loop. Viral Loop, I don't know if you've read that, Brett.
I haven't yet. Yeah, I own it, but I haven't.
You own
read
it. It's a very quick
I only
read.
read about half the books I buy.
Okay, well, you just have to buy twice as many then.
Right.
It's a great book that chronicles how many successful companies have gotten to millions of users without spending any money on marketing or spending very little. And ultimately, that's going to be one of the hardest things when you're trying to scale is to acquire customers. So you want to get that cost per customer acquisition as low as you can. And this book will give you all sorts of ideas. I know, every time I pick it up, I get a new idea as a direct result of reading it.
Cool. Great suggestion.
Yes. So John, clearly Mutual Mobile has experience with being in the right market at the right time. And what that leads me to ask is, what will we see from Mutual Mobile in response to the current wearable tech boom? And what's your take on that market?
It's a great question.
That's a fantastic question. It feels almost like I planted that, but I actually didn't. So one of the things that's exciting to me about mobile is how mobile just has such a breadth to its meaning. The way that I think about the word mobile is it's not about iPhones or Androids or iPads. It's not about the devices. It's really about this new type of user. If we think about pre-iPhone, if we think about that world, it was really a time when people revolved around their technology, right? You went into work, you sat down at your computer. If you were in class, maybe you had a laptop on the table. If you were at a bank, you walked up to a kiosk and dealt with a really awful user interface, but you put up with it because technology required you to do so. In a post-iPhone world, all of a sudden, technology is starting to revolve around people. And that's a pretty amazing transformation. And so if you think about the next incarnation of mobile, the types of things that we're working on today and the types of things we'll be working on tomorrow, a lot of them are around that type of user. So environmental UIs are going to be absolutely huge, right? Picking up on voice, on hand gestures. Maybe we're talking after this, and I say, hey, we should go grab coffee next week at Spider House. Well, the technology should be able to make that calendar invite automatically, right? And it just makes our lives that much better. You think about other wearables, glasses, obviously, the one that's getting a lot of attention right now. And that's a great example of mobility. For the first time in history, you have this computer that you can truly use and have two hands free. And I don't know if that's going to be a big consumer advice. My thought is probably not, but it's going to be an amazing transformation in kind of the supply chain environment, in industries where you need two hands free. If you're a FedEx shipper and you're on your route, how about having those directions and a heads-up display, being able to recognize people when you deliver packages to them, and have both those hands free for carrying the box. Drones are also another thing. I mean, what's more mobile than that, right? And you have these smart robots that can deliver things. We all saw the Amazon video, and that's some architecture. Has everyone seen that? It's a fun video. You can tell it's a ways off. That's going to be the reality.
It's perfectly timed for Cyber Monday.
Oh yeah, what a stunt, right?
It was Brilliant.
But same-day delivery, I mean, that's another concept of mobile. And so those are the types of areas that we get the most passionate about and when we're working hard on right now.
Great. So we have time for one last question because we got started a little bit late. Who wants to close it out? Frank, you always ask a question. You're not going to ask a question tonight? Okay, you did. You had office hour. Great. We'll go back. We need it for the video.
So for entrepreneurs, some people are very interested in starting their own company or starting their own business. A lot of people don't know what it is that they're truly passionate about or what they really want to pursue. So how do you suggest to students or anyone who's interested in entrepreneurship, what's the first step of finding that path?
I don't know if there is one set answer to find that path. What's helped me to the ventures that I've started is something that I was deeply interested in learning about it, researching about it, without any idea that it would someday be a business. Because ultimately, unless you're passionate about what you go into, unless you enjoy doing it, it's unlikely you're going to have the attention and the care needed to follow that through and see it to a business. And so most hobbies, most areas where you spend your leisure time, if you're really into something, that's a great platform to start thinking of business ideas off of. The primary warning that I'll give is you don't want to pick a business just because you think it's going to be a hot market or because you think there's an opportunity there. Ultimately, that's going to flame out if you're not passionate about it. It's like trying to pick a job or a career path based on looking at a salary list, right? It's not a good way to figure out how you're going to spend some of the best years of your life. And I mean, that's the biggest asset that everybody has is their time. It's their time. T. Boone Pickens gave a commencement speech recently. I'm not sure what university, but I heard this quote. He said, I have more money than probably everybody in this stadium has today and ever will, is what he said. But I would trade it all in an instant to be your age again, to be 22, to be 23 again.
That's beautiful. It's awesome. So let's close it out there. Thanks so much, John.
Thanks, Brett.
This is fantastic.